Verse 79. After my passing, who will be the upholder of the discipline? How long should the teacher abide? How long should the teaching continue? Now, this is a strange question. It actually comes from chapter 2 of the Lankavatara Sutra, verse 51 of chapter 2. And chapter 2 is really the beginning of the teaching. Chapter 1 is concerned with the preamble and the setting. Chapter 2 begins with the 108 questions of Mahamati. And this is one of the questions. Verse 51 of chapter 2, or verse 79 of the Sagatakam, is one of the 108 questions. And if you read these 108 questions, you'll understand why I'm doing the verse summary. Because there are a large variety of questions, some profound and some seemingly quite trivial. For example, Mahamati asked the Buddha in verse 39, I'll just take a random selection from these 2 pages here, how do horses, elephants and deer get caught? Wherefore are there fools and despicable people? Pray tell me, thou charioteer of the mind. Wherefore are the 6 seasons mentioned? What is meant by the Ichantika? That's one who's without Buddha nature. Pray tell me, whence is the birth of a man, of a woman, of a hermaphrodite? Beings are born, this is verse 42 of chapter 2, beings are born in the various paths of existence. What are their specific marks and forms? How is abundance of wealth acquired? Pray tell me, thou who art like the sky. Verse 44, how is it that thou art thus apparent everywhere in every land, surrounded by such bodhisattvas of such various names and forms? And 45, why is meat not to be eaten? Why is it forbidden? Whence was the carnivorous race born? Who eats meat? And 46, why are the lands shaped like the moon, the sun, the Sumeru, the lotus, the swastika and the lion? Pray tell me. And 47, wherefore are the lands shaped like a capsized and upturned net of Indra, which is composed of all sorts of jewels? Pray tell me why. And so on. It's like a little kid who keeps asking questions and you just want to get the kid to shut up. And they don't seem worthy of a bodhisattva, mahasattva, a lot of these questions. It's almost as if at the beginning of the discourse, everybody present has been asked to write a question for the Buddha on a piece of paper, and they put it into a big hat, and they're just being read out here. So the idea is, just think of all possible questions you could ask, and the Buddha will answer them. But why have we got this particular question in verse 79 of the Sagatakam? And it's been put into the mouth of the Buddha. After my passing, who will be the upholder of the discipline? How long should the teacher abide? How long should the teaching continue? So this question was originally in Mahamati's voice, but now it's in the Buddha's voice. So let's just get the context here to understand why this question is here. Let's just get the context. And what we've been concerned with is the deconstruction of notions of the individual and of the world. Because one of the concerns of the Lankavatara Sutra, as it's mentioned in chapter 1, when the Buddha is addressing the king of Lanka, or Ravana, the demon king. I'll just read out this paragraph on page 10. Lord of Lanka, this is the realization of the great yogins, to destroy the discourses advanced by others, to crush mischievous views in pieces, to keep themselves properly away from ego-centered notions, to cause a revulsion in the depths of the mind fittingly by means of an exquisite knowledge. Such are sons of the Buddha who walk in the way of the Mahayana. In order to enter upon the stage of self-realization as attained by the Tathagatas, the discipline is to be pursued by thee. So this is the discipline of being centered on this exquisite knowledge, which is transcendental insight. And it's not about getting caught up in philosophical debate, as this paragraph seems to indicate. We're talking about the views of those around us, the views of conventional reality. We mustn't get sucked into them and take them as truth, because they're ego-centered. We have to destroy all tendencies that try to convince us in the reality, in the absolute reality of a physical world. We don't even want to be tempted by it. We want a revulsion, but only because we've got access to the truth, and that should be our focus. That is our samadhi. So this is the context. So once we've undermined all these notions, we've crushed them, we've destroyed them even, we come to the Buddha nature, suchness. And you think, well, if there's no ego interest, if you're not working for yourself or for others for the sake of the world, then what's the motivation for doing anything? Won't we just go into some quiescent stupor? Well, no, because as the previous verse 78 pointed out, the Buddha's nature works on its own accord. And so this is what the concern of verse 79 is. If this isn't upheld, if this isn't upheld through teaching, won't it pass away? Won't people forget about it? So once the Buddha's gone, won't the teaching be forgotten? And this is the concern of the Buddhist. There are various prophecies to do with 500-year cycles, when the Dharma, the teachings, will be in decline, or when it will be forgotten, and so on. But we don't need to worry about this, because we're not Buddhists. This is a concern if you're a Buddhist. We have the teachings. We have them in book form. We have them in electronic form. We don't need to be concerned about it. Our concern is with applying them. And as I mentioned before, it's very difficult to get enlightened if you're a Buddhist, because Buddhists are concerned with Buddhist things. They're supposed to be concerned with enlightenment, but in practice they're not. And verse 80 continues this theme. Things known as defiled or as pure are like hairnets, that is, wrongly perceived by the dim-eyed. I suppose it's like this mottled effect when you're in a dark room. You see all these effects with the eye. They really have nothing to do with such notions as birth, abiding and disappearance, or as eternity and non-eternity. These are the concerns of the traditional Buddhist or the traditional yogi. Purification. Things known as defiled or as pure. They're concerned with purifying themselves, purifying the body, purifying the mind. I don't know if they ever question this. Somehow they just assume that this will take them to enlightenment, but it never can. And this is what is pointing out in this verse. I don't think they're concerned with enlightenment, and they'll settle for a good birth, a good future birth. But what it's saying in this verse is, such things as purity and defilement have nothing to do with such notions as birth, abiding and disappearance. So that's the conditions of a future birth, a future abiding. Are you going to be born as a god? Or whatever, depending on how pure or impure your mind is, or as eternity and non-eternity. So are you going to even become enlightened and enter into some transcendental, timeless bliss, or some kind of oblivion, because that's the understanding of some. So these are traditional or romantic spiritual notions which prevail up to this day. They're embedded in so-called spiritual teachings, whether Buddhist or Hindu. You have to work on your body and mind. But the goal, when you get into this thing, the goal is ever receding. It will never happen. So Buddhists get concerned about the teaching, about the spreading of the teaching, whereas their concern should be with applying it. So 79 expresses that concern, and in a more general level, verse 80 tells us that concerns to do with purity have got absolutely nothing to do with future births or the possibility of liberation.